I was assigned to handle some church affairs. It was a physically demanding duty and involved some overtime. Sometimes I couldn't have meals or attend gatherings on schedule. I didn't mind at first, feeling that it was an honor for the skills I had to come in handy during my duty. I wanted to put everything I had into it. Then there was a period during which work became busier and my duty got pretty hectic. I got kind of worn out after some time and I started to feel a bit resentful. In a gathering one time, a sister suddenly told us we needed to go help unload some materials. She said that the matter was urgent and needed to be dealt with right away. I didn't really want to do it. I wondered why it couldn't wait until after the gathering. And if it was so urgent, someone else could do it. Why did it have to be us? Were we nothing more than hired hands? Although I did go, with this feeling of internal resistance, I really dragged my feet. I didn't put my all into it and just went through the motions. This was normally how I was. When something came up at the last minute, everyone else worked their hardest to deal with it. But I cut corners wherever I could. If I could get away with less, I shirked the hard work. Whenever I had to work a few extra hours, I felt resentful and unwilling, as if I were being terribly wronged. I got the job done on the surface, but it was done grudgingly. I'd want to take it easy once I'd finished the task the team leader had assigned me, and didn't want to help out the others who weren't done yet. I figured that was their business and had nothing to do with me. The team leader reprimanded me and dealt with me, seeing me dragging my feet. But I didn't reflect on myself. I thought he was just nitpicking and had taken a dislike to me. I did my duty really passively this way, content with the bare minimum. Seeing the other brothers all working so hard, I even secretly laughed at them. One time, transporting some lumber, I was carrying just one bundle at a time, while another brother was carrying two at a time. I thought, why are you killing yourself? There's no need for that, even if you have the strength. You'll wear yourself out. It's idiotic. In fact, I was younger than him, so carrying two at a time would have been no problem for me. But shouldering that much would make me sore. I was having none of it. Seeing me dilly-dallying in my work, the other brothers reproached me and told me to be more attentive in my duty. But I still didn't care. I felt like I was getting it done, so there wasn't any harm in it. Since I refused to correct my attitude toward my duty, I was replaced. In July 2020, the team leader told me that I'd always been lazy in my duty and that my humanity was lacking, so I wasn't fit for the position. I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach when I heard this. I thought, without a duty, wasn't I done for? Did I have any hope of salvation? I got more and more upset and really sunk into a depression. I prayed to God right away. Oh God, you've allowed this to happen to me today, but I don't know what I'm supposed to learn. Please guide me to understand your intention. I feel much calmer after my prayer. With my things packed, about to leave, I gazed at the other brothers off in the distance, all rushing to and fro, working enthusiastically, while I had lost my duty. I felt awful. I'd been a believer for over 10 years who could make sacrifices. I didn't have any kind of conflict or quarrel with the others, and got along with everyone for the most part. Why had the team leader said my humanity was lacking? I felt like there wasn't anything wrong with my humanity. I'd always pulled my weight. Why had the leader said that I had been slacking off in my duty? I didn't understand. But I knew that God is righteous. So if I'd been doing my duty well, I wouldn't have been replaced. The problem was certainly of my own making. After losing my duty, I didn't have to work so hard and didn't suffer, but I felt really disappointed, really downcast. I was coming before God in prayer all the time, asking Him to enlighten me to know myself. At one point, I read this in God's words. Some people always boast that they possess good humanity, claiming never to have done anything bad, stolen others' possessions, or coveted other people's things. They even go so far as to allow others to benefit at their own expense when there is a dispute over interest, preferring to suffer loss. And they never say anything bad about anyone just so that everyone else thinks they are good people. However, when performing their duties in God's house, they are wily and slippery, always scheming for themselves. Never do they think of the interests of God's house. Never do they treat as urgent the things God treats as urgent or think as God thinks. And never can they set aside their own interests so as to perform their duties. They never forsake their own interests. Even when they see evildoers committing evil, they do not expose them. They have no principles whatsoever. What kind of humanity is this? It is not good humanity. Pay no attention to what such a person says. You must see what he lives out, what he reveals, and what his attitude is when he performs his duties, as well as what his internal state is and what he loves. Reflecting on God's word, I realized that I thought my humanity was good because I measured it by some surface good behaviors. But this wasn't really in line with the truth. God judges a person's humanity based on their attitude towards the truth and their duty. It depends on their actual performance of their duties and whether they can uphold the interests of God's house. Someone with truly good humanity is devoted to God in their duty. They can suffer and pay a price. At critical moments, they can set aside their own interests and uphold the work of God's house. I started to reflect, in light of God's words, on whether I really possessed humanity or not, and what kind of attitude I had in my duty. Then I read this passage. Many people always think of exerting themselves in manual labor as something undignified. Is this view correct? They look at manual labor as if they were doing service, rather than performing their duty. Is such an interpretation correct? No. You must perceive this as follows. All that stems from God and is what God asks and relates to various aspects of labor and work that God demands. This all requires the cooperation of man. It is all the duty of man. The scope of duties is very broad. Duties are your responsibility. They are what you ought to do. And if you are always evasive about them, then there's a problem. To put it mildly, you are too lazy, too deceitful. You are idle. You love leisure and loathe labor. To put it more seriously, you are unwilling to perform your duty. You have no commitment, no obedience. If you can't even put the effort into this minor task, what can you do? What are you capable of doing properly? If a person is truly devoted and has a sense of responsibility toward their duty, then as long as it is required by God and as long as it is needed by the house of God, they will do anything they are asked without selection. They will undertake and complete anything that they are able and ought to do. Is this one of the principles of performing one's duty? Yes. Some who do physical labor disagree and say, "You spend all day doing your duty in your room, sheltered from the wind and sun. There is no hardship to this at all. Your duty is much cushier than ours. Put yourself in our shoes. Let's see how you do after several hours working outside." In fact, every duty involves some hardship. Physical labor involves physical hardship, and mental labor involves mental hardship. Each has its difficulties. Everything is easier said than done. When people really do act, in one regard, you must look at their character, and in another regard, you must look at whether they love the truth. Let us first speak of people's character. If a person is of good character, they see the positive side of everything and are able to accept and comprehend these things from a positive perspective and on the basis of the truth. That is, their heart, character, and temperament are righteous. This is from the perspective of character. The other aspect is how much they love the truth. What does this relate to? If, regardless of whether or not they comprehend God's words and whether or not they understand God's will, they are still able to accept their duty from God and are obedient and sincere, then this is enough. This qualifies them to perform their duty. It is the minimum requirement. If you are obedient and sincere, then when you carry out a task, you are not careless and perfunctory, and do not look for ways to slack off, but put all of your body and soul into it. Having the wrong state within produces negativity, which makes people lose their drive, and so they become careless and sloppy. People who, in their hearts, know full well that their state is not right, and yet still do not try to fix this by seeking the truth, such people have no love for the truth and are only slightly willing to perform their duty. They are disinclined to make any effort or suffer hardship and are always looking for ways to slack off. In fact, God has already seen all of this and is just waiting for people to wake up, for them to expose and eliminate them. However, this person thinks, "Look how clever I am. We eat the same food, but after working, they are completely exhausted. Whereas look at me. I know how to enjoy myself. I'm the smart one. Anyone who does real work is an idiot." Is it right for them to view honest people in this way? No. In fact, the people who do real work are the smart ones. What makes them smart? They say, "I don't do anything that God doesn't ask me to do, and I do everything He does ask me to. I do whatever He asks, and I put my heart into it. I put everything I can into it. I don't play tricks at all. I'm not doing this for any person. I'm doing it for God." This is the right state of mind, and the result is that when the time comes for the church to be cleansed, those who are slippery in performing their duty shall all be eliminated, while those who are honest people and accept God's scrutiny shall remain. These honest people's state goes from strength to strength, and they are protected by God in all that befalls them. And what earns them this protection? Because in their heart they are honest. They don't fear hardship or exhaustion when they perform their duty, and are not picky about anything that they are entrusted with. They do not ask why. They just do as they are told. They obey without examining or analyzing or taking anything else into consideration. They have no ulterior motives, but are capable of obedience in all things. Their inner state is always very normal. When faced with danger, God protects them. When illness or pestilence befalls them, God also protects them. They are greatly blessed. God's words totally laid bare my perspective, attitude, and state in my duty. I was entirely convinced, and I saw that God truly does see into our hearts and minds. He observes our every action, our every move, our every passing thought. I remembered when I was just starting out in my duty, I was full of resolve to repay God's love. But over time, work became greater and demanded more effort and suffering, and my true nature showed itself. I started cutting corners and trying to get away with doing less. When we were working, everyone else threw themselves into it, not afraid of wearing themselves out. But I was dragging my feet, cherry-picking the easier task. When I saw someone else working so hard, I even silently laughed at him for being foolish, thinking I was the smart one, that I could get my duty done without wearing myself out, and still enjoy God's blessings afterwards. Have my cake and eat it too. I was so cunning, so despicable. Where was my humanity? I had laughed at others for making all that effort, for being such fools. But of those I had considered fools, not a single one had been replaced. I, however, had lost the right for my duty, even though I thought I was so smart. I was the victim of my own cleverness. I was the one who deserved to be called a fool, for doing my duty in a way that was disgusting to God. Doing his duty well should be the calling, the life mission of a created being, and it's something that the Creator entrusts to mankind. But I'd been acting like I was nothing more than a day laborer, just muddling through it, not taking any responsibility. I totally lost the conscience and reason that a created being should possess. I was worth less than a family watchdog. At least a dog can serve its owner, watching over his yard, and it will be loyal to him, no matter how it's treated. By contrast, I was being provided for by the church, enjoying God's blessings and grace, as well as the watering and provision of His Word. But I wasn't completing the task He had assigned to me. I was less than a beast, unworthy of being called human. Being removed from my duty was brought on entirely by my rebelliousness. I didn't have the slightest doubt. I later read this in God's words. If there is no real price and no loyalty when you perform your duty, then it is not up to standard. If you do not truly devote yourself to your faith in God and performance of your duty, if you always go through the motions and are perfunctory in your actions, like an unbeliever working for their boss, if you just make a token effort, muddling through each day as it comes, not reporting messes when you see them, seeing a spill and not cleaning it up, and indiscriminately dismissing everything that is not to your own benefit, then is this not trouble? How could someone like this be a member of God's household? Such people are unbelievers. They are not of the house of God. Not one of them is acknowledged by God. In your heart, you are clear about whether you are being true, whether you have devoted yourself when you perform your duty, and God keeps account too. So, have you ever truly devoted yourself to performing your duty? Have you ever taken it seriously? Have you treated it as your responsibility, your obligation? Have you taken ownership of it? When issues arise as you perform your duty, do you report them to the church leader? Do you try and resolve them by seeking the truth? If you think the less trouble the better, if you always approach things based on the philosophy for living, then you are not performing your duty. This is actually doing service. It is working to earn a living. I found that you all quite like doing service, which proves that you are not of the house of God, but are hired workers, ad hoc labor, who after finishing their work, take their money and leave, go their own way and become a stranger. That is your relationship with the house of God. Members of the house of God are different. They take pains over everything in God's house. They take responsibility. Their eyes see what needs doing in God's house, and they keep those tasks in mind. They remember everything they think and see. They are unburdened. They have a sense of responsibility. These are members of God's house. Have you reached this point? No. Then you still have a long way to go, so you must keep pursuing. If you do not consider yourself a member of the house of God, but a bystander, then this is the same as already having eliminated yourself. How does God look upon you? God does not consider you an outsider, yet you have put yourself beyond the door of His house. So, objectively speaking, you are not of His house. You are beyond His words. You are an unbeliever. When I pondered God's words, I realized that considering the interests of God's house in all things, seeing God's house as my own house, and being responsible in my duty to please God and bring Him comfort, was the only way to be a member of His household. I had been doing my duty in God's house, but because of my attitude and my approach to my duty, I wasn't truly a member of His family. I was like an employee of God's house, just doing labor on the surface, going through the motions without putting my heart into my duty. I wasn't personally invested in anything that didn't directly affect me. I saw I really was totally devoid of humanity and had no integrity whatsoever. I wasn't even worthy of being called a service doer. I was a non-believer. I was totally unworthy of doing any duty. After that, I often reflected on why I had this kind of attitude in my duty. What was the root of it? I read this in God's words. Until people have experienced God's work and gained the truth, it is Satan's nature that takes charge and dominates them from within. What specifically does that nature entail? For example, why are you selfish? Why do you protect your own position? Why do you have such strong emotions? Why do you enjoy those unrighteous things? Why do you like those evils? What is the basis for your fondness for such things? Where do these things come from? Why are you so happy to accept them? By now, you have all come to understand that the main reason behind all these things is that Satan's poison is within you. So what is Satan's poison? How can it be expressed? For example, if you ask, how should people live? What should people live for? People will answer, every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. This single phrase expresses the very root of the problem. Satan's philosophy has become people's lives. No matter what people pursue after, they do it for themselves, and so they live only for themselves. Every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. This is the life and the philosophy of man, and it also represents human nature. These words have already become the nature of corrupt mankind, the true portrait of corrupt mankind's satanic nature. And this satanic nature has already become the basis for corrupt mankind's existence. For several thousand years, corrupt mankind has lived by this venom of Satan right up to the present day. Comparing God's words, I found the root of the problem. I had been living by Satan's laws of survival, like every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost, and let things drift if they do not affect one personally. Theirs also always get the upper hand, never the short end of the stick. These satanic poisons were deeply rooted within me and had become my very nature. I lived by these things and had become increasingly selfish and despicable. I only thought about my own interest in my duty, and I did whatever was beneficial and easiest for me. I wasn't giving any thought to how to care for God's will in my duty. I thought about how God became flesh and came to the earth, enduring immense humiliation and suffering to express the truths, to cleanse and save mankind. God had expended so much for the salvation of mankind. But I'd been enjoying the rich material provisions and watering of the words bestowed by God without any sense of gratitude, resenting the slightest hardship in my duty. I was totally devoid of any conscience and reason. Lacking in caliber, I couldn't do any kind of important duty, and God didn't reject me. He arranged for me to have a fitting duty, giving me the chance to experience God's work and to understand the truth. This was God's salvation. But I couldn't tell the good from the bad and was lazy in my duty, which God detests and is saddened at. At this thought, I was filled with regret and hated myself for being lazy and slipshod in my duty. I particularly hated myself for the depth of my satanic corruption and lack of humanity, and I didn't want to live that way anymore. I resolved that no matter what duty I was given after death, I would do my best and work my hardest, and I'd stop being slipshod or deceitful toward God. I came before God in prayer. God, before I was taking my duty too lightly, being selfish, despicable, and devoid of humanity, I'm willing to repent to you. I will work hard to do my duty and repay my debt to you to comfort your heart. After that, I began putting all of my time and effort into sharing the gospel, wanting only to do that duty well to make up for my past wrongs. Over a month later, the leaders saw that I had turned around my attitude toward my duty and notified me to take on my previous duty again. I was incredibly excited and said quietly, I give thanks to God for giving me another chance to do my duty. Tears welled up in the corners of my eyes when I hung up the phone. My heart was overcome with gratitude and debt toward God. Considering my attitude and rebelliousness in my duty in the past, I was filled with regret and shame. I knelt before God in prayer, weeping and thanking Him ceaselessly. I wanted nothing more than to offer up all of myself for God and to put everything into my duty to repay God's love. Regaining my duty after having lost it, I learned to really treasure it. I no longer thought that doing physical labor is suffering, that it's degrading, but that it's an honor. That's because it's a commission from God. It's what He requires, and even more so, it's my duty. I used to be under the mistaken impression that there was no difference between doing work in God's house and doing work out in the world, that it was nothing but toil. This experience taught me that working out in the world is just to make a living, and any hardship is for personal gain. It's meaningless. And though in God's house, it is also performing labor, it is doing my duty. No matter the hardship, it has value and gains God's approval. This adjustment of my duty allowed me to truly see God's salvation, as well as see clearly my own selfishness and that I was lacking in humanity and sense. Recalling my past duty, I felt especially in debt to God. From my heart, I didn't want to just be an employee in God's house anymore, but to seek to be part of the family. Now, I've just been bursting with energy in my duty. Sometimes things are a little difficult or tiring, but I don't complain anymore. I can throw my whole heart and all my strength into doing a good job. It is God's judgment and chastisement that has turned around my absurd perspective toward my duty and transformed my attitude toward it. Thanks to God.